Hey guys, J.Anthony here, just coming to you from my metropolitan condo. We're going to do part 2 of the watches that I would not recommend and stay away from, but it's become clear to me that there are still some insecure people watching my videos. So before I start this video, I know that you insecure people are going to tune out because I'm wearing a Seiko. And because I'm wearing a Seiko, I can't know anything about watches. So I figured out the way to get to you guys, and it's very easy. I just need to show you some expensive shit, and that way I get credentials and you actually listen to me, because apparently having really expensive things gives you taste. So just for you guys, so you stay in here, let's throw some stuff your way. So just pay attention to the brand names. Prada, Gucci. What do we got? We got some Tiffany here. Oh yeah. Louis Vuitton. Sure. I don't know what this is. It was expensive. Oh, Italian leather briefcases. Oh, let's see. Burberry. Burberry, 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 Versace, Giorgio Armani, Lacoste, Burberry, Yves Saint Laurent, Italian leather shoes, more Italian leather shoes, more Italian leather shoes. Pay attention to all those brand names, because that gives me credentials for you people that are really insecure. Remember that, okay? Oh, and I think this is Versace. So now that I've gotten your attention and you're not going to tune me out, let's talk about why Seiko makes the best watches in the world. Actually, you know what? I said I was going to do part 2. So let's go to part 2 of watches I'd recommend and watches I'd stay away from, now that I got you all to pay attention to me. Hey guys, now that I've gotten all your attention, and to hold your attention, I'm going to wear an obnoxiously bright orange Burberry shirt. And just to make sure that I don't lose any more insecure people, let me throw on a Lacoste too. We'll dress this up. Oh, orange and blue with Armani jeans. That's the way we do it. Alright, now that I look like a stereotypical stuck-up prick, let's talk about watches. So, in my last video, I went on for 25 minutes and I rambled forever. And forgive me, there's just so many watch brands out there to talk about. There's just no way I can cover them on one video. Let alone, you know, it'd take me 50, 60 videos and I'd still miss a lot, because there's a lot of these small micro brands out there, especially now these days, that are really taking off, and it's just so hard to cover everything. So I've been paying attention to some of the feedback, and I know there's a bunch of other questions you guys are asking me, and so I do want to get into it. I also didn't really do a good job of recommending high-end watches in my previous video, so I guess kind of to start there, if I came off like I have anything against high-end watches, I honestly really don't. And I actually still own a couple, so let me just make that all clear now. Watches that are high-end that I would recommend, Jaeger-LeCoultre. In-house movements, incredible style, incredible build quality. They're just classic, timeless pieces. Glashütte original, I talk about them all the time. Awesome German manufacturer. To me, they're like the bargain a Longines. They make awesome watches, awesome movements, awesome build quality again. A Longines. Extremely expensive, but there's a lot of people, I probably put myself in the same camp, that prefer those to Patek Philippe. The quality of their movements and just the overall design is just, it's incredible. And if you're really into like horology and just watch design in general, I mean, they have their own little thing. They're not a Me Too brand. They have very much their own sense of style, their own history. They're just extremely interesting. And they build some incredibly cool, complex movements, and I would totally recommend one of those too. And I mean, there's a couple other great ones up there too, but the reason that I mentioned the ones that I just did is they're independent. A lot of these larger high-end brands are just kind of get lumped under these large companies now. I mean, like the Blancpains and the Breguets, and they all get part of these like huge conglomerates, and in theory they have some sense of autonomy and they still have their own individual images, but it's my opinion, and you're welcome to disagree with me, that when you get into these big brand holding houses, you know, like the Swatch Group or the Richemont Group, that there's no benefit from being a part of one of those groups, and I just think that they end up sharing parts with lower end watches, and I don't feel that they have the same kind of value that you get from an independent brand that's controlling all their own components and isn't answering to a larger authority that they're doing their own thing. You know, Breguet, for example, I haven't really talked about Breguet on my channel. I absolutely love the way Breguets look. You know, Napoleon wore a Breguet, Winston Churchill wore a Breguet. But a lot of their movements are based on other movements, and you know, they do have some movements, in my understanding, that are legitimately in-house, although To me, it's kind of how you define in-house. I know some of their designs are just based on older, like even Longines designs, which nothing against those movements at all, but you're spending 10, 15, 20, $30,000 on a watch, and you have options out there like those Shoot the Original, Jaeger-LeCoultre, or Longines. You know, to me, I'd rather defer to a company that's giving you something completely in-house and a totally bespoke, clean sheet design versus something that is a modified version. I don't want to put them in the same group as people that modify ETA movements, because I do think that those watches are done to a higher caliber, but I still think that there's kind of that loss of value there. You know, some other watches that people brought up on my channel while my thing reloads here is Bulova. And you know, Bulova is a very interesting watch company, and I'm hoping one of these days that I can do a review. One of my cousins just purchased a Bulova Space View, and if you don't know what that is, you should look that up. Very cool early quartz watch, tuning fork watch. Really, really interesting piece. You know, and Bulova has, to me, since the 60s, kind of just gone downhill in terms of having something special to offer. And part of that is that they've just kind of become a generic watch that you pick up at a department store. Like in the US, I mean, you find them at Macy's and just generic department stores. To me, they've lost their specialness. You know, they're not really making watches like, you know, the Space View anymore. They're making stuff that's just generic Japanese source, movements, plastic retainer rings, chintzy bracelet quality. I mean, they've lost anything special about them. The Precisionist line is interesting. I think those watches at $150 are a really good deal, but what they want retail for those things, to me, the build quality doesn't justify that watch. So those of you that are curious about Bulova, vintage pieces like the Space View, I think are absolutely awesome. Current stuff, I don't really think they have anything to differentiate themselves in the market, and they're just kind of selling Me Too stuff. What other things have you guys been asking me? Tudor watches. I own a Tudor watch, and I've never put it on my channel. I have a vintage Tudor sub. You may have heard me talk about it on some of my other videos. I own a Tudor. I'm not a huge fan of Tudor, in all honesty. For those of you that aren't familiar, Tudor is Rolex's lower end brand, and they use Rolex Oyster cases among other components, and they're manufactured by Rolex. However, instead of having in-house Rolex movements, they actually use off-the-shelf ETA movements. Now, as if you've been watching my videos, ETA is doing this whole rush to go in-house on everything, and if they do keep following that regimen, sooner or later, I'm assuming Rolex is going to have to transition Tudor to an in-house, made in-house, in-house brand with in-house movements. And if that happens, that'd be interesting to see how that plays out. Design-wise, I know some of you guys have asked me what I think about a lot of the newer Tudors. I absolutely love the way they look. Like there was the Black Bay. There's a couple just really nice Tudor pieces design-wise. And case quality, you're getting the same case quality you get off of a new Rolex. We just got Tudor back in the United States. I know those of you OUS have had Tudors around for a while. We had them in the US for a while, and they went away, and now they're back. I think a lot of people didn't buy them here originally because they didn't have the cachet of a Rolex or an Omega. Nobody knew what Tudor was. Design-wise, I think they're fantastic. Build quality, you know, they're as good as any other Rolex, which is to say that they're very solid. But they have ETA movements, and to me, I wouldn't be in the market for a newer Tudor. The one I have, my sub, I bought it as an investment piece. In all honesty, if I've worn it once in the last year, I mean, that might be the exception to the rule. It has a generic ETA-based movement, and it's I want to say it has an ETA 2824 in it. Mine's from the 60s, and you know, it doesn't do much for me. I know a lot of people are really passionate about them, nothing against them, but again, my sense of value is if you're spending several $1,000s on a watch, I think even in that price range, you should be looking at, if you can't afford a new watch with an in-house movement, you'd be looking at a used watch with an in-house movement. To me, there's just better bang for buck. But great quality watches. I just personally just think with the ETA-based movements that they're charging a little bit too much of a premium. Some questions I got asked, IWC. If you've been watching my channel, I recently featured my friend Mark's watch. He has that IWC Piguet Pilot. It's the Mark 16. That has an ETA-based movement in it. You know, IWC, the lower end, they use ETA movements. So in terms of what you're getting for the money, I think that they're very expensive. In the lower end IWCs, I'd say sub $15,000. A lot of IWCs, they're using ETA-based movements, and I think at that price point, I think you're paying for the name. They make great quality cases. They have very nice designs. I personally have a big affection for the Portuguese line. I love the Portuguese chronos, but again, those are using ETA-based movements. Higher-end IWC watches with in-house movements, those are a totally different story. I don't have any first-hand knowledge of those and holding them in person, but I've heard very good things about them, and I find those pretty impressive. But we're talking about value for the money. I think lower-end IWCs are overpriced for what they are. That's not to say I don't think they're a great watch. That's not to say that my friend Mark's watch that I featured on my channel, I don't think is a really nice piece. Would I have bought that watch? No, but that's just my opinion. But I really like the way it looks. And so a watch like that, I think of, you could get a German-made equivalency for $400 or $500 with an ETA movement versus spending, $7 to $12 grand on it. So that's kind of where my brain goes. It's not very hard. If you guys are watching my channel, you probably know the watch market pretty well. There are tons of great German brands out there. There's kinds of just, American, you name it. There's a bunch of brands that for the $300 to $800 range will package an ETA movement into a very pretty case with a very good design. And you're getting the same quality on one of those watches as you would on a $5,000 to $10,000 Swiss watch with an ETA-based movement in it. So it's it's your money and it's your sense of value, but that to me is where I think is a better value would be. So that's kind of how I feel about IWC. I got a question about Brammo, and Benarus and Orbis Morgan, a couple other watches out there. The only one that I've really had a lot of experience with in that grouping is Brammo. And forgive me if I'm slaughtering the name on those. They're a UK-based company. They've been featured in a couple movies of recently, like Kingsman. I noticed they were talking about Brammo on that. London-based. I'll be honest, they don't speak to me at all. Again, they're using basic ETA movements. I haven't held one in person. I can't speak to fit and finish, but just the fact of what they use in their construction, I think, again, you're paying a premium for a marketing brand. So I really wouldn't recommend one of those personally. If you really like the style, like with anything in life, then obviously it's your money. And if something that really appeals to you, then I'm sure you'll be very happy with it. But for what they're charging for those watches, I just don't think that there's a lot of value there. I just think they're overpriced, to be honest. Somebody asked me about Bell & Ross. Same thing. I love aeronautics. I love airplanes in particular. Like old commercial airplanes and just old planes in general are a huge fascination of mine. And so Bell & Ross has a lot of these watches that look like aeronautical instrumentation. I'm totally sucked into the design of those watches. I think they look absolutely awesome. Again, though, they're using base ETA movements, and just because of that, I'm stuck up about it. I wouldn't be in the market. I think they're overpriced for what they are. I think if they were selling their watches in the $800 range with an ETA-based movement, I think I would be on that all day. But the market that they're selling into, at the price point they're selling into, I think they're a bit overpriced. Now, you can buy them on the secondhand market for about $1,800. They're a better value, but they're still, to me, overpriced. What other watches have you guys been asking me about here? Let me take a look here. And again, this is a video. I could create a series out of this if you want me to. There's just so many watches out there. But again, sub $1,000. There's just so many options out there. I talked about Cartier last time. I haven't really talked about Graham or Hublot or like Fortis. Oris. There's a bunch of these watches that all play in the, well, Hublot is outside of this, but all play in like the 1,000-ish to 3,000, 4,000-ish range. To me, they all kind of run the same to me in my mind. They're all, again, warmed over ETA movements with a pretty case, and the rest of it you're kind of paying for the marketing. And there's this opportunity to purchase watches with similar fit and finish, sub $1,000, as long as you're okay with not paying for a brand name that's highly recognizable. I noticed you guys have been mentioning a lot in the comments Christopher Ward. I personally have never held a Christopher Ward. I know that there's other channels that I've watched that have featured it on their channel, Urban Gentry among others, I've noticed. Just what I've seen rough hand, I think they look like a really good thing. I know a lot of you guys are very passionate about them. At the price points they're playing in sub 1,000 with ETA-based movements and the fit and finish they seem to be having, that to me is where I think there's a much better sense of value. So you can buy a watch like a Christopher Ward, again, this is just going on what I've seen about them, with an ETA-based movement with really good fit and finish for under $1,000, or you can go pay $5,000 to $10,000 for some other watch that has an ETA-based movement in it that's got a pretty name on the dial, but you're not really getting anything that much more for your money. I don't know why you would. There's a bunch of specialty brands too, like Romain Jerome. They make watches that are made of like Titanic metal that they recovered from the wreck site. I mean, there's a whole bunch of random watches out there. And I apologize, I should have been better prepared for this video. I'm just trying to think of other ones that I may not have covered, just because, you know, again, it's like every time I create one of these videos, right after I film it, I think of 50 other watches that I really wish I would have talked about. And those watches that we're talking about that are sub $1,000 that I just think are really good values. You know, I know that there's quite a few people out there that are really passionate about Squale. I'm not a huge knowledgeable person on those, so if you have any experience with Squale, please feel free to leave that below. And I know you guys have mentioned that as a good brand. You know, for good things about Yacht-Master, I know a lot of people talk about Vostok. Vostok, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a watch from the Cold War and Russia period. It's you can pick up a good Vostok, like an Amphibia, for under $100, well under $100. I think I've seen one go as low as $30 or $50. And Vostok, you know, my original impression of them was that they were very low quality, but they're extremely reliable. And I understood that they weren't all that accurate. I understand in talking to some of you guys now that actually Vostoks can be regulated to be very accurate watches. And if you're in the market for just a mechanical watch for the sake of loving watches, and you owe it to yourself, I think, to go pick one of these things up. And frankly, I might consider buying one myself, because you can get one of these things. They're a cool bit of history. Again, they're from the Cold War era. As far as I know, they're like impossible to kill. They're just bulletproof. And now that I understand that they're easily regulated, you owe it to yourself, if you're just kind of interested in getting into mechanical watches, to go look at those guys. Again, that's the Vostok. And there's Piguet as well. Piguet is also kind of in that category of Russian watches. And I apologize, I don't really talk about them because I don't really have a lot of experience with them. And I remember seeing a couple where the crown was really wiggly on them, and I just the fit and finish kind of turned me off a little bit. But now that I've heard a little bit more about them, I understand that you guys have had a lot of good experience with their reliability and that they can be regulated to be pretty accurate. You know, that sounds like that's probably a pretty good option too, especially in the sub $1,000 or sub $100 range, you know, really. You know, there's other watches that, I mean, the reality is there's just a million watches that you can buy out there. I mean, there's and like even the Germans, there's Laco, there's Yacht-Master, there's Messerschmitt. I know, like, you know, in German, like, oh, there's just Junkers, there's Graf Zeppelin. A lot of those watches use repurposed Japanese movements, like the Miyota movements. And those are all, I think, $300 to $500 range. I've heard good things about a lot of those watches too. So again, this is kind of part two. You guys have kind of asked me, you know, what I would buy, and the reality is that I got thinking about this a lot. And this, to me, the watches below $1,000, the only ones you should, if you want something mechanical, the only ones you should be looking at are ones that are ETA-based watches or Japanese watches. So if you're looking at under $1,000 and you want to get a really good high-quality piece, look for one of these, you know, German brand watches, or there's even some U.S. brand watches that use ETA-based movements. Swiss, there's actually a couple Swiss alternatives too. Let me say that too. They use ETA-based movements. There's a lot of great pieces under $1,000, and you're going to get the same quality in general. You know, this could be the Christopher Wards, this could be, you know, Yacht-Masters, you name it. As you would pick up, there's Helson. There's, I mean, I could go on for 50 years, but there's a whole bunch of watches in that price range with an ETA-based movement that you're going to get fit and finish that you would get on a multi-$1,000 Swiss watch. You know, under $100, I pretty much covered what I'd buy on my last video. You know, the Casios, the Orients, the Seikos, and actually, there's so many awesome Seikos out there. I mean, for under $1,000, you can get incredible Seikos. The Orient Stars are just incredible watches, but I mean, the Seikos, like the SARB 035s, 033s, sweet watches. Anything with a 6R15 or 4R36 movement Seiko under $1,000 is a really good deal, especially the 6R15. That's an awesome movement, hacking, hand winding, highly accurate, long power reserve. I've had a lot of people ask me about Tissot. Tissot to me is kind of hit and miss. I think a lot of their lower end watches have quality that's no better than like a Fossil watch, but I think when you get mid-range with their entry-level automatics and the Powermatics especially, I mean, some of those are pretty good deals if you don't pay list for them. If you buy them used or on eBay, you can get one for about $300, $300 to $500. I think that's a good deal for one of those watches. The C Stars, again, I wouldn't pay retail, but for $400 or $500, I think they're a decent value. A lot of the watches too that I would just say stay away from are these department store brand watches. I forgot to cover this in the last video. Anytime you go into a department store and they have like any like off-brand watch, and like at least in the US, every department store has some like made-up brand watch sitting on their shelf, and they'll charge you like $30 to like $150. A lot of those watches are just nasty, crappy quality, and they're just total waste of money, and they'll be like, they're just fashion watches. But honestly, I mean, you could buy one off of eBay from the Far East for like $5. So just, I mean, those to me are like the most blatant crappy watches out there I can think of right now. It's just those cheap fashion watches you find in stores, like department stores. And then once you get over $1,000, honestly, it's far easier for me to list the brands I think absolutely represent a decent value than it is to list the ones that don't. There's only a few brands I think under $10,000 that I actually think justify their price. I do think Rolexes are worth the price. I know many people will disagree with me, and the reality is that they hold their value. People are willing to pay that price, and they do everything in-house, and they do everything to a high standard. Do I think they're the greatest watch in the world? If you've been watching me, you know I don't at all, but I do think that they justify the price. Again, I talk about Jaeger-LeCoultre all the time. I think Jaeger-LeCoultre is an awesome watch company. One I haven't talked about I'd stay away from is Montblanc. Montblanc is known for making pens. Why would you buy a watch from a pen company? Just my sense. Some of their watches look great. Just flicked you off, sorry. Just like fashion watches in general too, there's just no point to those things. Glass Shoot Original, again, Glass Shoot Original, awesome watches. I'd say vintage like Patek Philippe's, you know, I think those could be decent value. You can find Calatrava's for under $10,000. I'd probably look at one of those. Zenith, pre-owned Zenith, in-house movements, El Primero. Again, those are good bang for buck. Those are kind of, honestly, those are just kind of the few brands I'd look at. I've talked about Panerai before. I think that there's some opportunity there where there's some good value in Panerai as well. But a lot of the stuff that I see in the $1,000, $10,000 range is generic ETA stuff with a fancy name on the front of it. Now it's getting interesting because now we've got Orient, Omega, and we've got Breitling, and we've got Cartier, among others, going in-house. And, you know, the in-house movement pieces with their fit and finish, I think, are actually, you know, they do justify their price points reasonably well. I think anything between $1,000 and $10,000 with an ETA-based movement's a waste of money. But I'd say something with an in-house movement. If it's a watch that I haven't talked about and you're curious, I'd make sure you peruse, look for watch forums and kind of learn about the watch itself. But if I'm spending over $1,000, I'm looking for an in-house movement. That's just the way I'm wired. And I think anybody paying over $1,000 that's getting a rebadged ETA movement or something else, I mean, I've seen Japanese-based movements for over $1,000, which blows my mind. And not like Grand Seiko movements, but like base Miyota movements, like $50 movements and $1,000 plus watches. That's a total waste of money to me too. I think if you pay over $1,000, you should be expecting to get in-house quality. That's just kind of my expectation on everything, and that's where I come from. And when you get above $10,000, you know that you can argue all day that it's just nonsensical to pay over 10 grand on anything. So I don't really want to get into that conversation because, again, how do you justify spending $20,000 on a stainless steel watch, for example? And there's plenty of like Audemars Piguet for that are 20 grand that are stainless steel. I mean, like the Royal Oak. Audemars Piguet, by the way, I know people have asked me what I think about Audemars Piguet. I love a lot of their Gerald-Genta designs. The Royal Oak Offshore is one of my favorite watches of all time. I've never bought one because I've honestly been too afraid to. Everybody I've known that's owned one had major repair bills and just terrible service with Audemars Piguet. And I'm an anxious prone person, and the last thing I want is some service headache to deal with. So if you've had good experience with Audemars Piguet, please leave me a comment below. I'd love to hear about it because I would definitely be open to buying one. That's one of the few Swiss watches that I've always lusted after that I haven't bought. And again, that's just out of a fear of a service issue. But again, once you get over $10,000, a sense of value isn't really part of the equation. Now you're buying into the history of the watch company and what you think is good value. If you think that spending 10 grand more for a solid 18 karat gold is something that matters to you, I mean, that's very much a personal thing. But once you spend over that kind of money, the only real watches that really hold their value beyond that point are going to be your A. Lange Zona, your Patek Philippe, some Vacheron and Constantin, not a lot, and Audemars Piguet to some degree, like the Royal Oaks, hold their value pretty well. But beyond that, everything else in there, expect that what you buy for the most part is probably going to depreciate like a tank, and you're going to have terrible resale on it. But if you can afford one of those watches, I'm sure that's not a concern for you. So I'll leave it there. I can't really comment on those. The most expensive watches that I've owned have been, you know, right around $20,000. So, and they were Rolexes, and they held their value pretty well. I've never owned a $25,000 Patek or a $40,000 Patek. Could I own one? Sure. Is it something that really speaks to me personally? No. But again, I'm just a loser wearing a Seiko monster, so what do I know? So anyway, part 2. Hope I didn't offend anybody on this video. As always, I make fun of, you know, people being brand whorish and insecure. I don't really mean any offense. I want to poke fun at the fact that again, this stuff is completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter what any of this stuff costs. Just buy what makes you happy. Please, please, please. If I bash one of your favorite watches because it has an ETA movement in it, I'm offering you stuff based on, you know, my opinions and my experience, but at the end of the day, the only person you need to make happy is yourself. If you're going to be happy buying one of the brands I don't recommend, buy the brand I don't recommend. My opinion isn't the ultimate opinion. My opinion is like anybody else's opinion. You know, opinions are like assholes. Everybody has one, right? But buy what makes you happy. Dress how you want to dress, drive what you want to drive, live where you want to live, do whatever. But that's kind of my thing again. If you're going to be buying a watch in the ETA movement, don't pay over $1,000. You're getting ripped off. There's tons of great ETA-based watches under $1,000. There's tons of awesome Japanese watches under $1,000. If you're spending over $1,000, get a watch with a great provenance that has in-house movements. I think that's where you're getting the best bang per buck. Over 10 grand, you know, everything could be overpriced in that in theory. So I don't really have anything to say about that. If there's other watches you want me to talk about, please leave them below. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. If you think I'm an asshole, tell me I'm an asshole. If you disagree with what I had to say, feel free to tell me below. You guys are awesome. I really, really, really appreciate the feedback and thank you for everything. This is awesome and I really appreciate that we get to have these kind of conversations. I'm learning so much from you guys every time you leave me comments. So thank you so much and enjoy your watches.